Bye, buttress.
All the music featured in this episode of Phenomenology Club was made exclusively for it by our club member Lankatron. To download this release and other Phenomenology Club music and to learn more about Lankatron and our other club artists, please follow the link in the upload description to our website www.phenomenology.club/public-radio. We're just about to get into this episode, but before we do that, let's warm up a little bit. Let's do some word association. Let's do some word association. I'm going to say a word, and I want you to respond with the first word that comes into your head. Are you ready? Let's go. Wow. Deep. Train. Gay. Speaker. Buck. Hello, you motherfuckers. Welcome back to Phenomenology Club. Today I want to talk about a topic that is very relevant, especially in recent months. And hey, I'm going to be topical for once. I'm going to talk about something relevant instead of something random and absurd that nobody knows what to do with. Today I'm going to talk about separating the art from the artist. And why has this topic been especially relevant in the past few months? Maybe a little bit longer? I don't know. Time is an illusion. Well, if you pay any attention to the news and media, then you know that all of these various characters are becoming canceled for their various behaviors that society has deemed unethical. And a lot of these people are artists. And this discussion has become so relevant recently because a lot of people are saying that just because you might characterize an artist as being a bad person or an evil person or a serial rapist doesn't mean that you can't appreciate their art. And that's why we have to separate the art from the artist, because if you don't, you are contributing to censorship of art, and that's bad. I'm clearly being facetious, but I do think that that is a relevant point. This idea that if a thing holds value, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and deprive ourselves of the thing that we think holds value just because the person who made it is a dick or a cunt. So, it's a fair question. Let's talk about it. Firstly, ethical questions aside, let's just talk about this concept, separating the art from the artist. How would you do that? What is the mechanism of action separating the art from the artist? Is this thing even possible? I'm just gonna go ahead and deliver my thesis straight up. No, it is not possible to separate the art from the artist. And the first reason being, it is impossible to divorce yourself from anything that you already know. You can't separate the art from the artist unless you know nothing about the artist. Absolutely nothing. And even when you know nothing about the artist, you still are conceptualizing and thinking about, on some level, the fact that there is one, even when you don't know who the artist is. How can I say that? I say that because, and this is my first point, people fail to realize that the thing that they are ultimately admiring when they look at any given artwork or piece of music is their subjective impression of the artist's skill level and abilities. They're not just admiring this artwork as if it exists in some vacuum, even if they don't know who made it or anything about them. They are admiring the fact that it was created by someone. And really, isn't that the definition of art itself? A thing that was created and that the artist believes to have some sort of aesthetic value, and that is why they are presenting it to us after creating it. Because lots of things are beautiful. A sunset, a tree, a leaf. Why when I see a sunset, a tree, a leaf? Why don't I feel the same way when I look at them as I do when I look at art? I think these things are also beautiful, and that art is beautiful. Why do I take in art differently than how I take in a sunset, a tree, a leaf? Because it was created by a person. So when I see an artwork, what I'm appreciating about the artwork is not just its implicit beauty, as if it were a leaf or a tree or a sunset. What I'm appreciating is the fact that somebody made it, the fact that someone was skilled enough to make it. That is why I like art. If a thing didn't have to be created by a person to be art, there would be no purpose for art. There would be no reason to set it apart as a thing of value, because we already have sunsets and trees and leaves. So that is my first point, and the thing that I think we need to consider first and foremost. That what I'm appreciating about art is the fact that somebody made it. In that way, my appreciation of the piece is intrinsically linked to my perception of the artist's abilities. And just like I said, I don't need to know anything about the artist to capitalize on this. When I see a piece of art that I think is executed so well and it's so amazing, I start projecting. I start building all these ideas in my head. Oh my God, I bet they meant to do that. Oh my God, that seems intentional. Was that intentional? I can't tell if that's intentional, but if that was intentional, oh my God, amazing. And I bet they did that. And what were they thinking when they did that? And oh my God, what a great idea. How did they have that idea to do that? That's how I appreciate art. So let's introduce our dilemma. I'm looking at this artwork. I love it. I think it's amazing. I'm sure that the artist meant to do that. I'm sure they meant to do that. I'm sure they were thinking something like that when they made that. And how did they even think of that thing? Great. Now, our dilemma. I find out that the artist is a bad person. Bad person. Now what? Can I still like the art piece? Well, it seems to me that I don't really have a choice in the matter, because my response is involuntary. When I find out that an artist is a bad person, my response is not, oh my God, that's too bad because their art is so amazing. I guess I can't support them anymore because I don't support bad people. No. My response is, wow, I can't believe that the person that made this thing is really not nearly as intelligent as I thought they were. And that's actually not that hard to believe, because everything I thought I liked about the piece was really hypothetical. I don't know this person. I saw the thing they made and I thought it was awesome. And I assumed they meant to do this, they meant to do that. They must be highly intelligent. Because to make good art requires intelligence on some level. And this is my second point. And when I say intelligence, I don't mean IQ or book smarts or knowledge or any sort of elitist perspective on intelligence. I'm just saying that to make a good art piece does require some form of intelligence. And when I find out someone is a bad person, it's not that I now just dislike everything they have to do from some moral obligation. It's that I realize they are not as intelligent as I thought they were. Because moral depravity betrays intelligence. So whether or not you realize it, this is a very loaded statement. Rather than continue on it in this moment, I'm going to come back to it. Just hold that phone. And in the interim, let's just hear that again one more time. Because moral depravity betrays intelligence. And this phenomena that I'm experiencing is not just limited to moral matters or ethical issues. Have you ever seen a painting that you thought was like amazing, and then you click to learn more about it and it's by a 5-year-old, and then you're like, damn, I could have sworn that was by an adult. And it's like, I still like it, but I don't like it the same way, because everything I thought was intentional about it, I no longer think was probably intentional. I think it might just be some really awesome coincidence that came from the brain of a 5-year-old that wasn't necessarily thinking about the same thing I was thinking about when I looked at this piece and judged it. The same principle applies here. I'll give a personal example. When I first saw these photographs, I thought they were amazing, bro. I was like, wow, I love this shit. This is the kind of shit I like to look at. These photos are awesome. I was sure that the things that I liked about it were completely intentional, and that somebody took the time to sit and think about these photos and make them look that good so that I could look at them and love them. But then I made the mistake of looking them up. And to my horror and dismay, I found out that these photos were not made by some intentional process. No, they were made by some motherfucking hippies swallowing film and let the film interact with their digestive juices, and then they shit it out and scan them. And that broke my fucking heart. And my world came crashing down, because I really thought that somebody had put a lot of thought and effort into this thing. But even though I was disappointed, I was not necessarily shocked, really, because, like I said before, everything that I thought I appreciated about the art piece is in my head. It's an invention. And clearly, I must have overshot. I put too much faith in what I perceived the abilities of the artist were. And so, in light of this information, that these photographs were only made by eating some film and shitting them out, it's not that I no longer find them beautiful. I still love the photographs, but I don't respect them in the same way. Now it's like I respect the photographs like they were a sunset or a tree or a leaf. Beautiful, but I no longer am in awe of all the things I thought were happening when it was created by a person. My response is completely involuntary. I can't help it. So, same thing applies when you find out that an artist is a bad person. Involuntary response. This isn't me saying, oh, I do not support acts of moral depravity, so therefore I must disassociate any value I ever had from this thing, as if I could even choose to do that. I mean, if I love a painting, I can't help it. I'm going to keep loving it. But if I involuntarily lose respect for the artist, what am I supposed to do? And of course, the response will always be proportionate to the thing that it is as well. Let's look at an example. Roman Polanski. Love his films. Started watching them and appreciating them before I find out that he raped a 13-year-old. When I found out he was a bad person, my involuntary response is not that I just now hate everything or no longer appreciate his art anymore and now can even only look at his films like a sunset, a tree, a leaf. It's not even that. It's not that I think now that everything good he ever did was unintentional, that he has no skills, that no skills went into his movies. But I have to admit that his work was involuntarily cheapened in my head. The quality of the work is cheaper now because I know this fact about the artist. It's not that I'll never watch his films again or that I don't like them anymore. They just have less of an impact on me. I am just no longer as impressed. I can't help it. Same goes for this guy. Really like a lot of the music. If I knew nothing about him, I think I would assume he's a pretty cool guy. Found out he's not a cool guy, now what? Still like the music, but I no longer think it was by some super smart weirdo doing stuff away in his little Norwegian cave or whatever. Now it's like, oh, okay. It's sort of a meathead. I appreciate the work a little less. I still appreciate it, I appreciate it less. And also, as far as my moral obligations go, now I'm just not going to give them any money. It's not that hard. I can torrent their stuff. I don't need to financially support them. That is what I think my moral duty is. But as far as liking their art, I still can do this. But I can't separate the art from what I now know about them. It's just impossible. It's involuntary. So that's why I don't even understand that people insist so hard you need to separate the art from the artist. It's like, dude, I'm trying. I can't. And I can't see any motivation for why I should try to gain some superpower so that I can do this. This response is completely involuntary, that a piece of work is cheapened in my head in response to finding out that someone is a bad person. And it's proportional to what it is, like I said. Another example. G.G. Allen. This guy's really weird because personally, what intrigues me about him isn't even anything that I think he did intentionally. I think his music is really trash, not well made, but what intrigues me about him is that he's such a terrible person. It's like reading about serial killers. It's like, wow, I can't believe somebody's like actually chopping off people's heads and burying them in their front lawn, facing them, and wow, this is weird, that's crazy. I don't admire them as people. I admire the fact that they exist. That's how I feel about him. It's like, are you actually some crazy genius? I don't think so. I think you smoked a ton of crack and you're just really fucked up. Probably not even just from the drugs. I think you're fucked up. You're kind of an anomaly of a person. So, do I appreciate him as an artist? Do I need to separate the art from the artist? No, the only thing intriguing about him is that he's so fucked up. Or somebody incredibly relevant to phenomenology, Heidegger. He's an example of a person who I think, upon finding out that he is a Nazi, his whole body of work pretty much goes out the window because he is a philosopher. And what do philosophers do? Construct meaningful worldviews and share them. Philosophers aren't just guys that invented the microwave. If I found out that the person who invented the microwave is a bad person, I'm not just gonna throw away the fucking microwave. It doesn't matter. But when I find out a philosopher, a person who is respected for having meaningful things to say about our experience of being in the world and how you should conduct yourself in it, when I find out that he is a member of the Nazi Party, my involuntary response is like, well, that's fucking whack. His philosophy must be garbage. And anything meaningful that he had to say, first of all, wasn't even an original thought, okay? It basically is a piece of art, really, if it's anything. I wouldn't say it's a meaningful philosophy. I'm no Heidegger expert. But do you see what I'm saying? I can't really appreciate anything left about it. And that's not to say that now I'm just rendered incapable of considering anything they say seriously or, giving it actual thought. I can still read Being in Time and dissect it from a perspective that doesn't necessarily take into account that he's a Nazi, even though I know it. And hypothetically, of course, maybe someone could really be amazing and also a terrible, evil person, but I would be lying if I said I could even think of one example. Nor can I think of anybody I know or have interacted with in real life that is just this terrible fucking person, but I just think they're so smart. Relevant? I think so. How many geniuses can you list that are just terrible people? Honestly. Who? Hello, Phenomenology Club.
I mean, I've studied Hitler a lot, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're assuming that you can put Hitler in he was just a monster box and don't think about it anymore. And there's a bunch of things that you can't say about him. You can't say he was stupid. You can't say he was without artistic talent. And So it's very necessary if you're dealing intelligently with a true monster that you give the devil his due. There's one story about Hitler. He won a medal for heroism in World War I.
Yeah, okay.
And
All right.
he was
All right,
sitting
yeah,
around with a group of his buddies and went off
all right,
to do
you take
something
care
and
now.
got away.
Okay.
What?
I won't stand for this.
Alright, no, but really, let's take a moment to address this argument seriously, because I'm just about to wrap it up here, but I do want to try to answer, at least posit some sort of answer in response to this argument we just heard now raised by the voice of dissent. Because we want to always be able to answer the voice of dissent when it calls us. So, I want to try and answer this question raised of whether or not it can be said that a bad person, our caller gave us the example of Hitler, whether a bad person can be a genius, whether in an artistic sense or some other way. And to do this, I want to go back now to a moment earlier that I said I would come back to, when I said that moral depravity betrays intelligence. Now, first of all, what I meant to say was that moral depravity betrays ignorance, but I'm pretty sure that both wordings capture my intended meaning. If they don't, that's okay, because the argument I am making is thus. It is my strong belief that acts of moral depravity display a lacking of intelligence. And the reason I say that is because I do not believe at all that any action, any moral transgression, any crime, not even the most horrendous, can be said to be fundamentally immoral. Rather, I believe that all the things that I would describe as immoral, things like murder or assault or bigotry, these things are not immoral because they're fundamentally wrong. They're immoral because they're illogical. It can be rationalized that they are morally incorrect, because it is my very strong belief that at the end of the day, morality is only a logical argument. And while yes, I do believe that what we have come to define as morality may absolutely point to extrinsic characteristics about the natural world and how it's organized, things like empathy and emotion and how those interact with our social functions. Even in light of this consideration, morality as a concept is a part of the construct of human knowledge and of language. All moral arguments are made within this framework, this construct that creates the very definition of morality itself. Therefore, all moral arguments are logical. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about how I feel about all that, lucky you, there's an entire video about it on this channel, so watch it after this one. So, now that I've related this point to you, let's wrap it up by addressing this voice of dissent, who has just called us, if you remember, and raised to us this question: can an evil person be a genius? An evil genius? And to answer this question, I think we must first actually ask another one. Because this question, can a bad person, a person like Hitler, be said to be a genius? To ask this question, I think, presupposes something. It works on the premise of an assumption. And what is being assumed here when we raise these kinds of arguments without clarification is that the extent to which any one individual is influential is corollary to their efforts, to their own fulfilled intentions. Without clarification, when we try to examine something like the intellectual prowess of a person like Hitler, the implication is that their influence is reflective of their own fulfilled intentions. But do we know that? We already know that that is not always true. It absolutely cannot be said that all public figures, political, historical, artistic, or otherwise, we cannot say that all public figures have achieved their influence by way of the merits of their own abilities. Yes, clearly even the least talented among these people has achieved influence by way of something they did. But we know that so many people are influential simply for being outrageous, obscene, idiotic, empty, confused,
so many influential figures we can think of throughout history are not necessarily influential on the merits of their own talents and fulfilled intentions, but rather this environment of advantage they exist in. An environment where these figures in the context of that environment become spectacles, and we, the public, almost come to regard them as only spectacles, specters, the aesthetic of a thing. And then beyond that, we find that many of these same people sort of seem to exist in some sort of feedback loop where the spectacle of their success becomes the spectacle, and the spectacle of that success of the spectacle becomes the goddamn fucking spectacle. Everything's crazy. Really though, think about it. Look at how many people are known simply for being absurd, or simply for being stupid and doing dumb things. Can it be said that in many instances of public figures, the spectacle of them far supersedes the strength of their own individual accomplishments? Just a moment ago, I was speaking about serial killers. I put up an image of Charles Manson. He's a perfect example. Is it really the strength of his accomplishments, that accomplishment being the murder he orchestrated that projected him into the public consciousness and into fame? Was it really the scale or specifics of that murder? Was that murder so particularly brutal, so much more brutal than all other murders? Is that what cements Charles Manson into the public consciousness? Or rather, is it possible that the extent to which we perceive him as being culturally relevant is influenced by so many variables that could be in many ways happenstantial? It's not just what he did, but the aesthetic of him and what he did as it existed in a specific place in time and in cultural history that makes him memorable, that makes him become a spectacle. He becomes a symbol, emblematic of something. And in this way, Charles Manson has become embedded into the cultural iconography, not necessarily because what he did was so unique in and of itself, but rather because the conditions were right to make him a spectacle, the object of a cultural focus. And so all this is very relevant when talking about a person like Hitler, and why I said that this point does need to be raised, and it is absolutely not nitpicking. It is incredibly important to the conversation. Because look at Hitler. Why is this question asked of him so often? People are intrigued by the aesthetic of the history of Hitler. He exists as this sort of historical boogeyman, a dark shadow, bigger than all the rest. The spectacle of him is so much larger than the man himself. So I have to say, being a person that was not literal witness to, that was not able to observe the conditions that Hitler rose and fall under, I don't think I would ever feel entirely confident in my opinion here as to whether or not Hitler can be said to have been highly intelligent. I truly don't know. But what guides my opinion here strongly instead is knowing that the cultural iconography of Hitler, the aesthetic of him and his influence, I know that it is probably wise to maintain somewhat of a skeptical attitude when confronted with people raising the voice of dissent like our caller just did. Because just as I exist in an environment where it is true that the spectacle of Hitler has so thoroughly permeated the public consciousness, I could not even divorce myself enough from what I know about him to trust that I haven't been entirely influenced by the spectacle of him. I know too that that caller exists in the same environment I do. So in the interest of not being naive, I gotta say, it's a little weird. I think it would be incredibly naive to not let this fact cast doubt on what I perceive the arguments of these men like our caller who just raised the voice of dissent to us a moment ago. I have to wonder why Hitler is such an object of their focus and why his influence persistently heaps so much adulation upon. A more interesting question, therefore, I think, than was Hitler an incredibly talented genius would be, to what extent is our perception of Hitler's actual accomplishments skewed by way of existing in a context where Hitler has become embedded into the public consciousness as history's ultimate villain? A question like that interests me much more, because this is Phenomenology Club. And on that note, I think that this is actually a great place to conclude because once again we have come back to our central thesis. That thesis being that it is impossible to separate the accomplishments or achievements of any individual, whether artistic or otherwise, from the context of what we know or what we think we know about them. Because in all these various discussions, whether about art or political conquest or public influence, they are all designators of achievement. And what is achievement? The fulfillment of intentions, accomplished by the individual who set out to accomplish them. So when I aim to try to make judgments about the achievements of individuals, it is not in vain, I think, that we first try to delineate an understanding of where the boundary line would be drawn between what skill was actually poured into these achievements, to what extent an individual's intentions were fulfilled, and what might only be being amplified and transformed by way of our perceptions. Phenomenology. And now, it is finished. Good night.
Talk about it. I consider myself a transgressive filmmaker.
I pretend I'm around before you.